I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Got a feeling we might be putting our black belts on tonight and going really deep. Really excited to have this guest with me tonight. Joining me is artist, researcher, author, Robby Marx. Robby, thanks for coming on, man.
Yes, for sure. Thanks for getting a hold of me and, seeing what we could talk about.
Yeah. I already like where we're going with this, with everything in the, we talked about before I started recording, but let me just real quick though, let me give you a chance to tell everybody about yourself if you like, or about your project and your book that you're working on.
Yeah, I'm an artist. I have been doing art professionally for probably between 30 and 35 years. I basically exist in a creative space. And when the pandemic happened, I work in the music industry quite a bit, not as much as I used to. And all those jobs, when the music industry collapsed, basically, I had, all this time on my hands. So I had been like perusing, going through various ancient texts since I was in my 20s, and I'm in my 50s now. And it's just something that I've continued to be fascinated with. I enjoy all of the information and material and kind of going in and making comparisons and analysis kind of these. And when you're taking notes on these various periods of history, you can pull stuff from biblical sources, you can pull stuff from archaeology, you can pull stuff from ancient texts, and you kind of put those together and you kind of find these hidden stories that exist that, just like the dramas we have today, these are kind of like little stories that you don't really see unless you really delve into these subjects and kind of, just swim in them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what, and the way that I do that is when I'm doing the artwork or when I'm doing, any mundane task, I basically have a PDF reader. And I just have that, so I'm constantly just listening to books while I'm focusing on doing art, while I'm stacking wood, while I'm, and it's just kind of been something that kind of entertains me, and I've, enjoy like going down these various rabbit holes and exploring these various mysteries and kind of drawing out the lifeblood of what they are,
Yeah, me too. I love going into this stuff, and to be immersed in this for 30 years is impressive. You reminded me of something. I had a teacher once this was a writing teacher, and she told me, what you want to do is chew and chew until you spew.
Yep.
Just taking as much information as you can and then let it spill out onto the page as a writer.
Yeah.
It's a great method.
I don't know if you get into the Grateful Dead at all, but they have this old song that they never recorded and put on an album. It's like their pre kind of Warlock era. But it's called "The Faster We Go, the Rounder We Get." And I've kind of always taken this model where you kind of like pull everything in, and as you're spinning it all around in your head, you're not necessarily getting the truth of something. You're finding truths within that, right? But you're getting this more rounded, cohesive idea of because information itself, it's not solid. The word itself, if you look at the word itself, it says information. It's the formation of these different things coming together. And it's informing you, but it's information. It's coming together. So, you kind of have to like take all this and and like you said, the more you can cohesively take in and understand, the broader and rounder view you have of, these systems and cultures and people, and
Well-rounded. You become
yes,
well-rounded.
right. And you want to read both sides, you want to read Osiris's side and you want to read Set's side. You want to read, the German side and you want to read the American side.
Mm-hmm.
You want to read the British side and you want to read it's like, so you always want to cross compare, and it's like I was really getting into the 30-year war and kind of getting into this bohemian idea where it was like the first intellectual uprising for liberty coming out of the White Mountains in ancient Bohemia, and the Prussians pretty much came in and crushed it. And so I was reading, I read like 10 or 12 books on the 30-year war, and they were all from the perspective of the West. And finally I found Schiller, who was a German, that wrote about the 30-year war. So you get a different perspective. And then you can take these perspectives and kind of see how they mesh and kind of, it's like when you get into logic, you have logic and you have rhetoric and then you have fallacy. And wherever you find two things in the texts that don't necessarily line up with one another, that is a fallacy. So you have to kind of and then of course it's all like Platonic relativism in the sense that each side has its own viewpoint. So, but by understanding both those viewpoints, you get a better understand, like we were saying, a rounder understanding. Yeah.
Absolutely. A year or so ago, it's been over a year now, I got really into studying the Nazis and just everything that was fomenting in Germany leading up to the 30s and the 40s,
Kush,
of course.
Yeah.
And one of to your point, I think when the story of what really happened there really started to open up for me was when I started reading some of the German writers. And there was one guy in particular who not only is this stuff hard to find over here in the West, but he was banned by the Germans as well. He wrote a book called Before Hitler Came. And he was an esoteric guru. He was an occultist through and through, the guy who wrote that. And he was saying in that book, this party formed out of this occult reformation that was happening in Germany. And by the time the Nazis did get in power, they were, and he talks about how he influenced them and how he was very much part of the movement, right? But by the time they got in power, they did a propaganda cleanup. Of course, we know how the Nazis were with propaganda, but what they did was they went back and banned his book because they didn't want everybody knowing. Apparently, they didn't want everybody knowing the true occult origins
of the party.
They sprang. Yes.
Yeah.
But,
and what have you read, Peter Levenda, with his?
Yeah, I have. To be fair, I've browsed through one of his books for a research party. I haven't gone through and actually read entire, but I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and then there's also The Nazis in Wall Street is another good one by who was it that wrote the Skull and Bones book that actually got to go into and look at the records of the Skull and Bones. He got it from Scarlett Iserby. Oh, I wish I could remember his name.
But it up. Nazis on Wall Street. I've heard people reference that book.
Yeah, I've got his Skull and Bones book over here, but it's across the room. As soon as you say the name, I'll remember it.
Yeah. Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. And who wrote this? Here it is. We've got it coming for you. Anthony Sutton. Is that the one?
Anthony Sutton, yeah. And Anthony Sutton, he actually had, entry into the actual records and being able to look at this stuff. And he was like, in the in crowd amongst the elitists, and they kind of figured out what he was doing, and he kind of got exiled, so Yeah, there are, like that. You have some of Scarlet Iserby's stuff. You have, what is it, Carol Quigley, who openly wrote about the Anglo-American, um, basically the plan to absorb America back into in Britain, the Anglo-American establishment,
Mm-hmm.
and he agreed with it. Quigley said he agreed with it. He just didn't think they should, make it secret. And then when they released the book, they recalled them and they destroyed the printing plates. And then later they only released the second half of it, so you don't really understand the full context, And Carol Quigley, the guy that wrote that, he is a professor at Georgetown University, and he is Bill Clinton's mentor. So, this is like, oh yeah. So,
Ooh.
and this stuff, that's the whole thing. H.G. Wells, he wrote The Open Conspiracy. And who was it? It was one of the Huxleys. I think it was the Huxley grandfather.
Aldous or Julian?
I think
Oh, it was the Bulldog
the
Huxley.
bulldog that for
Yeah.
Darwin. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He's like, basically people don't read, so put it in the books, just to document it and record. But the masses in general, they're stimulated and entertained by the moving pictures, the black scrying screens that we're also, sucked
Uh-huh.
into now. All
There's
that kind of,
Another Wells that I'm thinking of who wrote about this
yeah,
too.
yeah.
1984.
Oh, 1984.
Yeah.
As far as what's his name there? That
Orson.
that, that was that Orson Welles?
No,
He
wait, did I
did
get that
the
wrong? I got that. I think I just got
yeah,
that wrong.
1984 is
George Orwell. Why?
George Orwell.
I meant,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was thinking Orson, but I was thinking Orwell. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Orson Welles, he was behind doing the whole alien invasion radio show that
Yes.
was part of the DARPA test. So
I've
what was
always,
not DARPA? It was the Stanford Research Institute that funded all of that War of the Worlds
yeah.
stuff, and they were basically wanting to see how people would react when this stuff was broadcast over the. And they had people out on the streets, so they say, shooting at the water tower
You know
because they
what?
thought it was,
Man, it's funny that you bring that up because I didn't know that little part about War of the
mm,
Worlds.
mhm.
But I've talked about this on here before where my theory was that that was a psyop
Oh yeah.
to basically, yeah, see what would happen, but also to like numb the public down
Mm.
because, well, I was,
Desensitization.
yeah, because I got really into the alien thing, and I
Oh
was
yeah.
at one point, and now I've realized that there's a lot more to it. And,
Oh yeah.
but so I'm not on either side of that issue anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm walking in this gray area. But I thought, man, that would be perfect for them to put on this big event,
Hmm.
and in case they were really worried about a real alien invasion,
Yeah.
by the time they did that whole orchestrated event, and if a real one ever happened, people would be like,
Mm.
we've seen this before.
Well,
This is
and that's very much like when the Air Force came out with those videos where they're tracking the unidentified objects, and they're saying, "Oh, the aliens are here," and all the conspiracy theorists are now like, "No, no, no, no."
hmm
So it's a meme of itself, man.
hmm
It's funny how though it kind of echoes in reality. It's like, is reality creating are we creating reality, or is reality creating us?
Yeah,
Like,
for
it's
sure.
very, yeah, yeah.
Well, that's the feeling I got when I read that before Hitler came, and I just want to tell people real quick that's Rudolf von Sabotendorf is who wrote that.
Some Bottendorf, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the
And
way
some
history,
Bottendorf, well, he
go ahead.
said, Hitler does the dance, but I call the tune. Because
hmm
he was one of the financiers behind the early beer pushs. And yeah, and when you get into those beer push, they were using at that time, they were using a circular swastika with a
Right.
dagger over it, and that circular swastika is the X with the O. That's the heraldic symbol that Lilith brought to Jethro when he was practicing black magic. That's the mark of Cain, the X with the O in it. And when you look into the old medieval texts, when they would put something secretly in, they called it sub rosa, and they would put the X with the O in it. and you see that X, and that O, just moving through time,
Right.
the different organizations that use it, from the Red Cross, the Templars, even the modern day Red Cross, that is used. Granted, they do a lot of human, support, but they collect a lot of information,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because at some point I really want to explore this deeper with you. This Cain, the mark of Cain,
Yeah,
the line of Cain, because I think that might fit in with Nimrod. We'll talk about it. But I like what you're bringing up here, and you're bringing some stuff to light that I had never heard. But but with the red cross and the circle, or the X and the circle, I
right.
was looking at something the other day with that, and they were saying it was representative of possibly Nimrod or the line of Cain. And
It's
they
the
were
line of Cain.
is it the line of Cain?
Yeah.
Well, and they
Yeah.
also were saying maybe that the red dragons, in like the red dragons, for instance, on the crest of Wales, the country Wales,
Right.
or even like the dragon with the tail in its mouth
I
sometimes.
think Wales, which is where King Charles comes from,
Yes.
it actually has a white dragon. No, it's the red dragon, because they had the parade with the goat. Did you see that? Where they
No.
have okay, so when they inaugurated King Charles III, Chucky the Third, as I call him, they had a parade, and heading the parade was a goat, like a male goat with big horns, and they had a vest on it, and on the vest was a patch, and it has the red dragon, and it says the red dragon leads the way. So
That's the order
yeah,
of the dragon, right?
that's the order of well, there's different dragons. There's the red dragon, the white dragon, the black dragon, and those you're getting very much into alchemical colors, going back into the ancients with the red. You have the starfire, that is the virginal blood, and it's representative more of the female, whereas the white is more the seminal aspect, representative more of the male. And then within alchemy, the first thing you do is you burn off everything, and separate out the salts from the oils. And this is what they call the negrito state. So this is where you take this. It's essentially a black, almost ash, and then you're taking the oil out, and then you take that oil and you make a moonstone out of it, and that moonstone is the white stone, right? And that you're basically taking those oils and turning them into a crystal, right? And then by function of alchemy, then you turn it into the red stone, which is the philosopher's stone, which is for extended longevity, when you get into these various alchemists that like it's funny because it's like Harry Potter, and they have Nicholas Flamel in Harry Potter, and they have the Sorcerer's Stone, so they're very much like what is her name there that wrote Harry Potter. She's very much showing, these ancient kind of ideas and exposing, the kids to them, which I think is honestly a beautiful thing, because these are kind of the mysteries of the existence of what we are as humanity on this planet.
There's some of these writers like Tolkien as well.
Oh yeah.
I see a lot of mysticism in Star Wars too.
Oh yeah.
I
very
feel
Kabbalic.
I feel like it's out front in some of the Star Wars films.
Oh yeah. Especially and when you get into Star Wars and you go back to that earliest series that they produced, where they're showing how the Sid, or the Sith, were the line of the Sith were created. If you go back into the Irish text, the Sid, or the Sidhi, or they call them the Sith as well. These were the offspring of Nimrod, that had basically come from the Tower of Babel and had settled into the land, and were allowed to go into the hills and be the mystical people of the hills, and there's a whole text. It's called the Book of Invasions is one of the terms for the text, but it's an Irish text that goes deep into the creation and the schools of creating the languages after the Tower of Babel.
Wow.
Before they sent them out. And one of the guys in there is Phineas Farside, and he was like said to be the line that the Scythians came out of and that the Greek came out of, which would be going into India and going into Greece, early Greece, like back to the Etruscans. And then you see, if you study the mysticism of Mitra coming out of India, and then you can see that flowing into Greece as Mithra. And then when the Romans basically assimilate Greece, it becomes the worship of Mithras, which the Romans actually inverted. I have a whole show on that's in my feed.
Oh, I love it, man. I
Yeah.
was looking into the origins of London, which was at
Oh,
one
yeah,
time
yeah.
called Londinium,
Right.
and I was looking at the dates, and before they tell us that Londinium formed, there was something already there, and it was a temple to Mithras
Oh, yeah.
that predated the city itself. So
Right.
it's as if the cult of Mithra was there, and they established their center there, and then it's
Yep.
like the city grew up around that.
Right.
And I'll just because you said Scythians a minute ago, I was just looking at something the other day with them,
Mm.
and it was old Akkadian cuneiform, and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a record of the Scythians, and so apparently they're from Indo-Iran or
Right.
Indo-Iran.
Well, they came down.
Yeah.
There's a whole graph you can see that shows the timeline. And I want to say they came down from like the Atar Mountains and came down and split. And part of the group went into India and part of the group went to Iran. And that's where you see the sharing of the ancient tales of Mitra, which is the earliest form of Mithra, right? And it, when you get into Mitra, it's basically the idea of not the sun itself, but the light that comes from the sun. And he was the guardian of the crossroads. He was the one that was there when deals were made, because when you made a deal, you wanted to be in broad daylight. You wanted, it to be exposed, so as far as transparency for each party, so he was the light that shined down, fortified the ground and the living things, called people from their bed to get up and be productive. There's a whole, and then he had his consort, which was the moonlight. Not the moon itself, but the moonlight, so there's these ancient mystic ideas of light itself. And even when you get into every religion gets into this idea of light, some sort of effulgent light, like the within the Hebrew, the Jewish culture, they have the idea of the Shekinah, shining. And before Yahweh took away the Shekinah, it protected everyone. It kept the miscellaneous pests, flies, scorpions from biting them. It kept them from ever getting sick. And then there was a point where, Yadhe withdrew that into heaven. And that, and then when you get into in Rome, the foundation of Rome, there was arguments between Simon the magician and Peter in regard to Adam. When he came to this realm, he was blind because he had lost his heavenly vision. And that ended up, they ended up saying that was a heresy to say that Adam was brought into the world blind. Because the Shekinah had been taken away.
Yeah, the glory, maybe I've heard it called.
But it's like it's the Ein Sof Or. Yeah. It's the light, the limitless light that pervades, and basically is kind of behind the it's the negative essence of existence that all the ideas exist within. that these, and in each, when you get into Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, each Sephiroth is like in the negative form of existence with the ideas of certain energetic levels. So, and then, that energy comes down through the tree. But yeah, and then,
Reminds me of the Force.
yeah.
Force.
Oh yeah. Let the
know?
Force be with. And and that's interesting because Lucas almost relates that to some sort of a genetic function, in the idea that certain people have these midichlorians and certain people don't. And very much like Harry Potter gets into that as well, with
Right.
the half bloods and the idea that there's the pure magicians, and so there has been some speculation that there are potentially bloodlines coming down from the ancient world that precipitate these abilities more so than the Muggles per se.
Sort of like a Jedi bloodline,
Yeah,
if I was to
yeah, or
stick with
a dragon bloodline.
yeah,
If
it's
you
more
want to
like
get
it.
specifically
Yeah,
into what it really is,
that would be your Chucky Charles, right?
Chucky, yeah.
Yeah,
Back to Chucky the Third, right.
where he was in. Well, this is, you can correct me because you probably know more about this, but I was under the impression that he was indeed in the Order of the Dragon, and that went back to Vlad, who was also in a similar order or the same order.
Right. There was actually, if you go back into the mid 90s, there was a whole article that got put out. It was a pretty long article about him talking about being related to Vlad the Impaler. And he had actually he had gone to Transylvania and was staying in Vlad's castle. There was a whole thing about it,
Yeah.
but yeah, when you get, and I don't know, when you get into Vlad, the
Have you ever
Impaler,
seen Vlad's tomb? You can
and
look up
probably at some
pictures.
point,
He's
yeah,
got the dragons plastered all
yep.
over that thing,
Oh, I'm sure.
and other
There's
symbolism.
Well, and so I had brought it up on another show that there's this Proto-Sumerian text that comes out of Transylvania that goes back like 8,500 years, where they found winged serpents or winged dragons with this Proto-Sumerian text that they're thinking possibly predates, some of the Sumerian.
What? That's
Yeah,
awesome, man. I got to
yeah.
look into that.
Yeah, I read about it a while back.
Okay.
Um,
I might
but
message you after the show and see if we can find
find
that
the
article or
information.
whatever, because that's
Yeah,
that's really cool.
yeah.
I've got family from Romania,
Oh yeah.
and
Well,
it's a
and
very convoluted history. That
oh
the
yeah.
history of that nation is, I mean, you could take 5 hours to and do an in-depth breakdown of the
Hmm.
history, modern history of Romania. Modern, I
Hmm.
mean, like since, maybe since the 1400s, but it
Yeah,
would take 5 hours to do
yeah.
it because of all the
Oh
ebbs and
yeah.
flows of it. It's
Yeah.
very, but that I love the Sumerian stuff. I love looking into the Sumerian stuff.
Oh yeah.
I did a really big deep dive on some of the Sumerian, we call them deities or entities, some of the ones mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh, like Lilith
Yep.
and
Yep.
definitely Ishtar. I looked into Ishtar and
Ishtar
Nanu
and
a
Nana,
lot.
yeah, and that's the beginning of the some of the early mystery schools,
Yeah.
coming out of Ishtar and Nana, moving into Kibali and Attests. You also see, a lot of the Sumerian gods directly transferred over to become some of the Egyptian gods, or are potentially interrelated, because you have when you look at these regions being so close, they are worshiping the same gods, but just under different names.
Right.
Like you have Isis, and she was known as Meronymus because she had 10,000 names. And, if you read Asclepius's Golden Ass, it gets into him communicating with Isis. And there was even a stele that was found by Alexander the Great, where it says, the people of Ethiopia call me this, the people of this country call me this, but the truly educated and those who know me, as the oldest form, call me, Isis. So
there's the 1226 Isaiah's, I think it's called the Isaiah's revelation, where you've got these Templars who said they had a vision of a goddess, of a divine feminine figure, and she told them, "I'm Ishtar, but I go by many names, but you can call me Ishtar. Build me a temple."
Yeah.
But she said, I go by many names. I thought
names.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Well, in Ishtar, when you get into Ishtar becoming Inanna was the one that was married to Tammuz or Dumuzid. Right. And when Nimrod had died, his wife Semiramis was, if you read the old text, she was inseminated by a beam of sunlight, and that was the rebirth of Nimrod culturally in a religious context that basically brought about the beginning of these mystery schools.
So I've come across this Semiramis thing, and I noticed that they, when you're talking Ishtar and Semiramis, they often get conflated. Maybe partially because of a book called Two Babylons by
Hillsop, yeah.
Yeah, but what do you think about that? Is Ishtar Semiramis, or are they different?
I think they're the same. And Semiramis, when you break that down, Semiramis, it means the branch bearer. So she's basically taking on the role of Eve, because when you get into the old fall from grace, the fall from paradise, Eve was the one that brought a branch from the tree of life with her into this realm from paradise, and she planted it, and it was they said it was white initially, because when you look into Enoch and the trees, they're almost made out of like spectral energy. So she was bringing a piece of this resonant energetic form, as she was condensed into a mortal coil, her physical flesh. She brought this branch from the tree of life, and they say she planted it, and it was white. And when they had what was it, Abel, that the tree turned green. And then when they had Cain, and Cain killed Abel, that all the leaves turned red and fall. So this is getting very much into the symbolism of the changing of the seasons, and the different, and then they had Seth, who would bring forth the line of Noah, coming into, the house of David and the line of Jesus and all that.
It reminds me, Robbie, of grafting. Have you ever seen where people take a branch of a plant from one
and plant it? That's forbidden in the Babylonian Talmud. That's strictly forbidden.
It's like the mixing of the species.
Yeah, you can plant, if it's not of the same species, if it's not of a tree. Like, you can't put a tree on a tree, but you can put a vine on a tree, because they're different species.
Right. They grow not together, but alongside each other. Sure.
Right. But now when you get into the ideas of the tree of knowledge in the texts, right? There's a lot of talk about the idea that the tree of life was actually growing out of the top of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? So, and you can draw this out in sacred geometric form, in essence, and how these things grow off one another. But this reflects into the Druids and how they would harvest the all heal, that in the wintertime, the apple or the oak tree, all the leaves would fall. And, this was a plant that they believed was left behind from when the gods had fled to the moon. And basically the fact that it grows out of the top of the apple or the oak. They almost saw it symbolically as like the blossoming of the third eye.
Okay.
And there was on a certain day that they would harvest it with a golden side. And yeah,
That's neat. It
interesting when you get into.
it reminded me of Ezekiel 31,
Mm,
where, and this is a passage I've been trying to decode, I guess.
mhm,
It's a wild passage, but it talks about how I think it's talking about an entity from the Garden of Eden, but God is calling it a tree for the first part of the
mhm.
passage, where it's like, consider Assyria a cedar of Lebanon with fair branches and forest shade and of great height. Its top among the clouds. And then it goes on to just to add more description about the tree. It towered high. It was above all the trees of the field. Its its boughs grew large. Its branches long. And at some point in this passage, it talks about how it was cut down,
Yeah.
and it's referring to, I think, an entity that was thrown off.
So now, interestingly, right, this talks about the idea of the what kind of tree is it here? The cedars of Lebanon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you get into all of these uh pre-biblical god forms, right? Osiris, he was encased in a tamarisk tree. You have the cedars of Lebanon, which were used to build the uh, King
Temple,
Solomon's temple, right?
right?
But when you get into Adonis, they had a cedar tree that they would hollow out and carve an effigy of the god, and this is directly related to Osiris. And then in Phrygia, with Attis, they would do this on 322, which is March 22nd, roughly, which is the beginning of spring, which you also get into Skull and Bones, which there was also in ancient Greece. There was a secret society that was like a death's head society, a death cult.
Mm-hmm.
That I think it was Diogenes was his name, and he died in 322. And that became a whole cult. And when you have the Skull and Bones, they date all their papers Agedimogenetus 322. So they add 322 years onto all of their dates, basically within the order of the Skull and Bones. And but that they would fell a tree in this death cult, right? And they would hollow out the inside, and then they would take that inside and carve an effigy out of it and put it into the tree itself, right? And this all goes back to Osiris getting encased in a tamarisk tree and getting cut. They open it up, and Isis, she wraps her brother husband's body in bandages and anoints him with sacred oil because he this is his first death, when Set had tricked him and sent him, basically encased him in a lead coffer that was jewel encrusted, and sent him down the Nile River. And that tamarisk tree is emulated in all of these various religions, from Adonis to Attis to Osiris. And what it is this great tree that these are all, even going back to Sylvanus of the ancient Akkadian. Sylvan he was god of the pine tree. So there's been this long standing tradition of the god of the tree, that he gets into the Zimmermans and the Niederland, and even the Druids, they would take and they would fell, I think it was an oak, and they would do the same thing. They would carve an effigy. They'd hollow it out, carve an effigy, and keep it in it for a year. And they would do this every year and burn it.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, it all has to do with going back to, like I was talking about, Inanna Ishtar and Tammuz, being the beginning, which is directly related to the fall of the elder Nimrod and the rise of the younger Nimrod. It's the beginning of this resurrection cult.
See, I was getting ready to make a comment on that. I was going to say, it seems like this all kind of goes back to the same group of individuals. Because if Semiramis is Ishtar, if Isis is Ishtar, is
if
the circle of individuals getting smaller. But what about, and you said Osiris, and is Osiris Nimrod?
So now when you get into Osiris, there's Osiris, and then there is the resurrected Horus, right? And when you go back to the line of the Hamites, right? It's coming down from Noah. You have Noah to Ham to Kush to Nimrod, right?
Right.
And Kush, when you get into Kush, the ancient name for Ethiopia was the land of Kush, and this is where Kush had settled, right? And these Kushites, they were the ones that were responsible, and they were known for their ability to build these giant edifices of these huge stone blocks that we see all around the world, especially in Baalbek, with like these 200-ton stones that we can't even move, in modern day, right? But it was these Kushites that were those builders that were building these, and Cush's son was Nimrod, right? And now Kush specifically, if you get into the histories, they talk about how when they initially went into Egypt, it was a place of slime and mud, and nothing could live there because it was a swamp. And they were the ones that went in and set up, the walls to collect the silt, to basically, and they brought these Kushite people into Egypt. And Egypt says directly that they are the children of the Kushites coming from ancient Kush, or ancient Ethiopia is basically where it is. And Kush is even cursed by several people because they say he took the simple ways of these people and created these God figures for them to bow down to in supplication, to give tribute to give tithings to basically, it's almost like when you get into William Burroughs' descriptions of the pyramids in South America, he talks about they're like attention stealers. So, these things, instead of focusing on, maybe the natural, but at the same time, all of these things go into the idea of ancient Sabianism, which is the worship of the stars. So, and they believe that every star was a sort of a deity, and that as above, so below, the reflection on earth as in heaven. So it gets into a lot of, just really interesting tie-ins.
Yeah, definitely. So, and I'm thinking about the pyramids of Kush, or I think sometimes they're called Nubian pyramids. You can look them up. They're in Ethiopia, and I think they're right off the Nile. They're not as
more steep.
They're steep. They're more pointed. So for people listening, though, so you have a deluge, you have a flood. You have Noah. Noah's son is Ham. Ham's son is Kush. Cush's son is Nimrod.
Correct.
And it's Cush's doings. Kush brings in all these gods.
He sets up and begins the worship of these different god forms. And he brings the people from ancient Ethiopia, ancient Kush, and brings them into Egypt.
Yeah.
And sets up Egypt.
So how many of those gods we think of as Egyptian gods today came from the Kushite?
Kush. Well, that's the thing. I think that when you really get into it, Thoth and Osiris are very intertwined. Almost like Thoth is the etheric form of Osiris. Like they're and even Thoth rides in the moon with Isis. Thoth was there when creation was breathed into existence. So he's kind of before time. where you have Osiris kind of being one of the children of Geb and Nut, that the earth and the sky, kind of like the Anunnaki, where you have the separation of the earth and the sky, and then from the churning of the skies, kind of the Anunnaki were brought forth, whereas Geb and Nut, they had the various children: Osiris, Isis, Set, and there was one other one. But yeah, and
You've got
Set.
these ancient cities out there too that I find
Yeah.
fascinating that these people
Right.
set up. Like I'm thinking about Noah's line real quick, and it's like he has Ham, Shem, and Japheth.
Yep.
There's stuff in Yemen to this day that they attribute to Shem. There's a
Right.
3,000-year-old city there in Yemen, and then there's cities there associated with the Queen of Sheba and those stories as well. But it's interesting. It seems like they knew how to build buildings up,
Right.
like multiple stories.
Yeah, and to be able to take these stones and mine them and square them, and the facility to be able to transport them and move them. And they were setting up these temples on ley lines. They were aligning them to the four winds, as far as the north, south, east, and west. They were aligning them with the stars. And I think that when you get into it, they would break down temples that were no longer in alignment and rebuild new temples that were in alignment as the heavens are slowly moving. And basically what we're left with now is just the end of that system that had subsided, going all the way back, I think, to Atlas and his children in ancient Atlantis. But that's
Poseidon.
what I was Poseidon. Yeah. Poseidon. Right. But go ahead.
I was just going to at some point say there seems to be maybe a splitting away when it comes to the religious belief system, because it seems like Ham wasn't like his father Noah.
No.
Ham became very polytheistic, and that's where you get Kush and Nimrod, because I mean, it seems like it's the revival of the line of Cain in some ways.
There's a lot of talk in regard to that kind of idea, that when the children, I forgot who it was, but it was in the line of the Ham and Kush, that they made instruments, and they said when the reeds began to blow, that those ancient devils or devatas came and entered into them. And basically all of the reason that the flood had happened for, they were communicating with these fallen ones, that Enoch speaks about. But yeah.
Which Enoch? Both of them?
Yeah. Oh, I know. Well, all three of them,
Yeah.
But
you've got Canaan too. So
well, I've looked into that's a whole different thing. But in some ways,
he's a son of Ham, right? Canaan.
Well, yeah. So, he's a son of it was Ham, because what it was they said that Noah had been driven to drink because of the problems that were occurring with the Cushites. Because they were basically beginning to do these pre-Diluvian practices of communicating with the fallen ones that had been trapped in the inner earth. And so Noah got drunk and he passed out. And then you have the whole case where, when you read into the educated, people that research this stuff deeply, they say that, this is a symbol of Ham basically sleeping with Noah's wife to supersede Noah's patriarchy, so that he can basically take control.
Uncovered his nakedness,
right? Yeah. And then the two brothers walk backwards with the cloak,
right?
And he tells them to get outside, and that's when he curses Canaan, right? As far as they would be the slave of slaves. And I think it says in the Bible 300 and something times it talks about how idolatrous and how bad these Canaanites were, you know.
Well, that's my thing. I don't want to, I'm still, making my mind up as to whether or not this is or represents the revival of the line of Cain.
Yeah.
I'm not for sure with that, but what else would the line of Cain be?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So when you follow the line of Cain, but the line of Cain is before the flood,
I know.
whereas the Canaanites are after the flood, right?
Yes.
And so
Well,
Cain
so
was
wouldn't it travel through one of Noah's sons?
that's why I almost think there's this is the same people, but they're creating this story to kind of cover up where they came from, or somehow supersede. I think there's several places when you're going through this information that they are obfuscating certain information.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Sure.
because when you get into, these stories, especially when you get into biblical canon, in the Old Testament, the Torah, these are the stories of the kingly lines. These are the stories of the winners telling their story that they want to be propagated. So we have to look at it. And like I said, you have to read both sides of the story. So, then you can go into the Persian texts and they talk about the Adites. And these Adites directly match all of the descriptions of the Kushites. And they were under this King Jamshed, and they were responsible for going down and overthrowing these Canaanites. And basically, this is when Phoenicia was created, and this is when the Israelites came in, and they just merged in with these Adites or these Kushites that were so you have the Kushites and the Israelites coming together, and that's basically the Kushites more so than the Israelites, but the Israelites came in later, and that is the creation of the Phoenicians.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get into the Phoenicians and their war with Rome, as far as like Carthage, and this is a trade battle between Rome and Israel, basically. And so what you're having is Rome is basically trying to supersede the trading of the Phoenicians. And so it's, but that again, back to those Adites, those Kushites, they were the builders of large edifices. They were, what was it? With the Phoenicians, when they came down into Phoenicia, or they came down into Cana, basically, right? And superseded the Canaanites. They made them slaves, and then the Israelites are coming in, right? So they were slaves in Egypt. So the Canaanites become the slave of the slaves, which is the curse of Noah, right?
Right.
So but it's at that point, if you go in and you read the histories, that Canaanite history completely ends, and they supersede the government, and this is when you have the rise of Phoenician history beginning. And this is the first time we see the phoenix, essentially.
Oh, wow.
Because they're rising from their ashes and becoming the phony. Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that's where the phoenix came from, was the Phoenicians, because I was looking at it, and if you look at the word phoenix and you just take the X off,
yep,
that's the first half of the word Phoenician perfectly.
Right.
It's
just like the Venetian are a slight different variant and there's an Irish name as well,
and it means it means renewal, or symbolizes renewal. So it's like it's the end of the Canaanites and the beginning of the Phoenicians, but is it the renewal of something as well?
Yeah. Well, it's the renewal of this pre-Diluvian line that is coming into the new world and setting up these ancient systems that used to be in operation, that were the reasons that Jupiter was so upset and wanted to bring the flood of Deucalion, that Yadhe-Vadhe, the storm god, was upset and wanted to wipe out. Well, and then you get into when you get into Enoch, it talks about the idea that the fallen ones were merging animals with fish, mixing all the different species, and and then you have the archangels Michael, Raphael, Uriel, and in a couple places you see Satanel, which is related to Seth. But they basically call out to God, and accuse those fallen ones of peering into the mysteries and teaching them to humankind. So again, we're back to this idea of this forbidden knowledge, very much like the snake, the serpent in the garden brings this forbidden knowledge all along the line. When you look at these mystery schools, you're learning this hidden secret, forbidden knowledge that is the ancient of ancients, that gets into these ideas of, the things that are hidden within the things.
I see a lot of connections with the garden, and I'm even with Cain, or with Nimrod and Cain, because Cain he gets kicked out of the garden, and he goes and creates the first city,
Right.
and then after the flood, we see Nimrod starting the first kingdom.
Yeah. Well, and that's the same thing with when you get into these very, like Uruk, it was Cain. Some say it was Enoch. These characters, you start to see overlaps, as far as the inventors of writing and the inventors of some of these various different he gets into the seven sacred mysteries, or the seven sacred sciences, that were said to be established by somebody. Some say by Enoch, some say by Seth, some say by what was the other one, Lamech.
Right.
So you get these different that discovered astrology, that
Well, I think about it like this, and you've got Cain again leaving the garden, and I imagine that he would have been taught some of the knowledge that Adam was taught,
yeah,
and then
because
and then his
I mean, that was his
kids.
dad.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it only makes sense. And then Lamech is one of Cain's children, or it's
Well,
Lamech,
so
Enoch. It's Cain, Enoch, and
yeah,
then Lamech, right? But it's a direct line.
but if you take the line of Seth and the line of Cain and line them up next to each other, there's multiple names that are the same in the same order. And so there has been some discussion when within, I want to say it's some of the Slavian countries, where they talk about the idea that the vine is lined up next to the lineage, and they're saying that basically the lineage of Seth is the dragon line. And there's arguments, because when you look at the Babylonians, they curse Noah for bringing the adulterated bloodline into the new world. And if you read into the Hebrew texts, there's at least two references I've found of Og, the giant Og, riding on. Well, he becomes king of Bashan later in the Hebrews, but he was a pre-Diluvian king that either rode on top of the ark or hung onto the side of the ark. So there's some
So Og survived the flood, essentially.
the flood, right? And he's a Nephilim, or fallen angel bloodline, a hybrid, which is what they were trying to wipe out.
Right.
And that's the thing, when you get to King James, and the reduction of these texts down to the 66 books that becomes the King James Bible, they're taking out these books of Enoch. They're taking out, the various, Jubilees. They're taking out, what was the Jasher? Yeah. But now, do you know how we got the book of Enoch back? Have you heard this story?
From what I want to hear your version, but from what I understand in modern times, is that it was found as in 1947 as part of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay, so it goes back before that,
In
right?
Ethiopia, probably.
Well, so here's the thing. Now you know who William Wallace is, right?
No, tell
As
me.
far as the Scott, Mel Gibson with the Scottish Highlands, and
Oh yeah,
we're gonna live free, and
yeah.
okay, so William Wallace, who is this high level king in the Scottish Highlands, his great 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 grandson, right, is also named William Wallace, and he's British Royal Society in
Right.
London, right? So he goes to Egypt because he wants to find the source of the Blue Nile. And the Nile, there's the White Nile and the Blue Nile, and they have different sources, but they come together and merge. So there's, esoteric ideas behind these different colors, like we've talked about. But he was looking for the origin of the Blue Nile. And while he's going to explore, he gets captured by the Ethiopians. And they bring him in and they're treating him nicely, and he starts conversing with the king, and the king sees he has a lot of knowledge and information. So William Wallace, he's this redheaded Scottish, they said he was like just mean and rude and towering. He was like 6 foot something tall, and he developed a relationship with this Ethiopian king, and he hung out in Ethiopia for 3 years. And when he came back to London, and this was in like 17, I want to say it was like right around 1776. Maybe it was 17, 2 years before, 2 years after, but it's right there,
Oh
right at the
wow.
foundation and the birth of the Illuminist movement, with
Right.
the revolutions against crown and altar. And
And the Bavarian Illuminati.
the Bavarian Illuminati and Adam Weishaupt, and for sure, for sure, it's but
I
nonetheless,
think I did read about this guy.
yeah,
Now
yeah,
that you mentioned, I think he also stumbled across Petra, if I remember correctly,
probably
in
so,
some in later
probably so,
travels. But yeah,
yeah,
but I'll let you finish it up though. This is good. So
yeah.
so
So
he's in Ethiopia.
yeah, so he brings back when he comes back to London after he's released and has this great relationship with this Ethiopian king. He brings back all 3 books of Enoch with him. And that is when Enoch got interjected back into the dialectic again, was
Hmm.
right at the birth of this these illuminist, revolutionary kind of movements.
Yeah.
Is the same time we get the book of Enoch back.
Yeah. It seems providential in
Yeah,
some ways.
in some ways, right? Right.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, that book, I man, boy, when I read that book, I feel like my eyes were
Haha.
opening up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Going back. Well, speaking of Enoch, there was something you said earlier about the fallen angels being trapped in the earth,
Mm.
and I'm guessing maybe that's like Semyaza and Azazel,
Yep. Yep.
but that these people were trying to had some sort of line of communication with them. Maybe they were getting
Well,
knowledge from them.
now, Azazel was actually the last angel that fell, I think, and he was a super young angel, and they actually, I think it was Enoch, took him back up into heaven to be raised in heaven. So, and that ties in with the Azazel and the Azazel goat. But if you follow that line of it, he becomes a desert demon and a sin eater
Well,
when they send out the
in
Azazel goat,
right, that's in the
you know?
Bible, in the Old
Yeah,
Testament
yeah.
too, where
Right,
the
right, right.
Israelites are traveling through the desert
Yep.
in the 40 years, and they pass through one location, and somebody sent like to go on an errand and put a goat out in the desert for Azazel or something,
Yeah,
if I remember correctly.
right. Well, the whole idea was there was a certain day, um, I want to say Passover, but that's probably not right.
No,
Um,
I think it got conflated with Passover a little.
Passover.
Uh-huh.
But what they would do is they would
No, it
have,
wasn't Passover. It was another holiday, though.
yeah,
Yeah.
but they would have 2 goats, and they would have one they would sacrifice and do their normal ritual, to to the higher form.
Mhm.
And then they had the other goat that they would take all of the sins of the community and put it on this goat. And then they would put a bag over its head and send it out into the desert to be devoured by Azazel or Azazel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a part too in the text that I was reading about where they said that he was put in the desert in a
Hmm.
pit
Yeah.
by either Raphael or Michael, the archangel.
Yeah.
And there's out there to this day, there's a pit out there. I think it's in Saudi Arabia where
The
they
fiery
say,
pit.
I don't remember what. Yeah, it's been a while since I looked into this stuff, but there's legends in the area of that's where they put Azazel, and it's
Azazel.
very close to a mountain range where
Mhm.
people also believe is where Ishtar entered the mountain to go down into hell to
Right.
get.
Right.
You'd probably know more about this than I do because I think this ties
Yeah.
in with Tammuz and all that
And all that.
and
Yeah.
Nimrod, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole thing, when you start getting into that stuff, I forget the name of the town, but yeah, there was a specific town that had a gateway that went into the underworld, that's related with so when you get into Sumerian and the Cthulhu, that's what they would call Inky in the underworld. And the oh, I wish I could remember the name of that city. But nonetheless, he would sit in the underworld and he would hold the tree of life, and he sat on a like a Rubik's cube almost. It was solid black that had that hashtag on all the sides. And as he sat there, the waters of life would emerge to feed the roots of the tree of life. And these were the waters that eventually flowed out and became the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was called Cthulhu, the man from the underworld, which gets into Lovecraft.
Love
And
Cthulhu.
Cthulhu, right. Which I
Yeah.
find interesting.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
I was told a story regarding that Lovecraft got some of those character
Mhm.
names from his father, who had a very big
Oh,
esoteric library,
right.
and that the story goes is that when his dad was dying and when his dad was in his deathbed, he was calling out these
Screaming and oh yeah.
Cthulhu and some of the
Yeah.
others. Yeah. We should go more into Nimrod, man, because I
Yeah.
have questions with that because
Yeah. Esquire.
there's a lot of there's a lot of these stories that have different versions. For instance, the story I mentioned a minute ago about Ishtar going down into like the 7 levels of hell to
To meet
retrieve.
Ereshkigal. Yeah.
So I've heard that was that she went down to get Tammuz, and that was because he had been killed by a wild boar. And I know there's
Yep.
other versions of the
Yep.
story with the details are just different.
Ovid. Yeah, Ovid says that when he was born, they put him into a coffer, and basically she gave him to the underworld. And then it see, all this gets into, like with Osiris, like with Adonis, like with that, it gets into the seasonal aspects,
Mm,
because Dumuzi or Tammuz, when he's in the underworld, is in the fall and the winter when everything dies and goes away. And Persephone, in order to get life to come back to the planet, she has to ascend into the underworld. And there's Oxford University has a whole series of the translations of the texts when the demons are basically going around and looking for Tammuz, Dumuzid, and they're like doing these atrocious. They're giving people skin diseases, and there's like a blank part where they do something to her buttocks, and and they're basically trying to extort the information of where Dumuzid is from these various people. And they said after she was abused, his sister would just wander through the streets like a lost dog after the abuse from these demons, right? And
mm,
finally they find him, and they're like sharpening their axes, and they throw him down, and then they pick him up, and then they strip him naked, and they wrap his head in his own clothes, and like they take him into the underworld, and then you get into the translations of Persephone descending into the underworld. And as she's going through each station, having to remove like her earrings, the chains of her breasts, her, all the different like accoutrements that she wears. The demons they're like, give up your sovereignty, ascend into the underworld, and they're like, they just keep harassing her like the whole way down. And then she meets a Reskagil in the underworld, and they negotiate the release of Tammuz Demuzi for half the year. He would, be above ground, and the other half the year, because they were all in love with him because he was so beautiful, much like Adonis, And
was he somehow associated with Nimrod in the sense that so is it Semiramis who has Tammuz? And
yes,
but there's like I've heard it put like this, that there's like an unholy trinity there where
right.
Tammuz is channeling the ghost of Nimrod or the spirit of Nimrod.
He's supposed to be the reborn Nimrod.
Tammuz is
when you
supposed
get
to
into
be
it, right.
Okay.
But the thing was, Nimrod, when he dies, if you get into the text, they say that a beam of sunlight inseminated her, and that's basically the reborn
That's
Nimrod that becomes Tammuz, which is the beginning of these tree cults we were talking about. And getting into these ideas of these fallen and resurrected god forms that we see in Egypt and ancient Syria and ancient Phrygia, coming into Greece, with Dionysus being the twice born from Zeus's thigh.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
We came full circle with that concept, and that's awesome. If you look at the etymology of Nimrod's name, what I was reading was that it means rebel, or
Yep.
To rebel with God.
Right.
So he was a bad boy, and I think that this is funny when you contrast this with his lineage, and you see that he is the direct descendant of Noah. It's like,
right.
Wow, the righteous man has the most wicked man. He's like the Aleister Crowley of the time.
Well,
right?
even
the most wickedest man in the world.
Right. There was called, what was his name? Maynard or Monard, that was Nimrod's son, that
Like
they said was even more wicked than Nimrod.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but when you get into
It's snowballed. It's snowballed.
Oh yeah. But now that's the whole thing back to Egypt, right? You have Kush, who I think is Osiris, is Thoth as well, right? I think because when you get into Kush, they said he was like, he's very much Hermes. Hermes literally means the son of Kush. So
really,
oh yeah. So Hermes becomes Mercury, and Hermes is also Thoth. So so you have
Hermes, is Mercury,
is Idris. If you get
Osiris?
Well, I believe so.
Wow.
And I think Kush came into Egypt and almost constructed these mythos, making, like I said, I think Thoth is like an astral form, and I think that Osiris is like a physical, earthly form.
Yes. Thoth is Hermes and Idris and Osiris.
Right.
And I've heard
and Hermes and Mercury, who is the god of the merchants and the liars and the tricksters. I mean, he's a trickster. He's a trickster god.
So yeah. So what about if I've already asked you this? Sorry, but I got to ask it again. So if Nimrod isn't Osiris, what's that association again? Because I've heard people associate Nimrod with Osiris, which would associate with him with Mercury, Hermes, Idris, and Thoth as well. Is it just because of the teachings of Nimrod?
It's
or the
well, so
teachings of is it the
Nimrod,
teachings of Kush because he brought
it's the
that into
teachings of
Egypt.
Kush because he brought that in and began this mythos
So
and
so so
began
like
these mystery
so
schools.
the priesthood of Nimrod would be using these principles. They'd
These
be using the
principles.
teachings of Thoth and all
Right.
that. Okay.
And when you have Osiris, that Set or Seth from the Bible, one of the other sons of Noah, right? He
Mhm.
comes in and he's putting it in. So if you read Osiris, it's all about, and the like Jacob's ladder used to actually be the ladder of Set. And Set got tired of participating in these rituals and kind of broke away. And he's Typhon or Seth, and so he wants to shut down the mysteries, which they said were the scenes of the rankest pollution. And when these mysteries of Osiris ended, what is it? John Quito, the Palestinian scholar, he says that the altars no longer smoked with blood, and then you have another area where they talk about the orgies that were going on basically went underground, and they weren't doing these things in the public temples anymore,
Mhm.
right? And so, but they talk about
That's in
Osiris,
that's in the Bible too. That's in Ezekiel
right?
28, I think, where
Yeah, yeah.
he's the prophet digs his way in or somehow finds a
Mhm.
secret passageway into
Mhm.
it feels like when you're reading it like it's an underground temple
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they're doing all this stuff
It
shut
might be
off
the
secret.
labyrinth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They recently just found the remains of the labyrinth
And
just here within the last like 6 months.
that's the same passage where they said the woman weep for Tammuz.
Tammuz.
Mhm.
And that's, yeah. But if you go back into the text, I think it was Cincilis under the orders of one of the popes that translated that. And the word he translates as Tammuz is actually Adonai. So it's actually Adonis. But all these cults are interlinked. No, he says Adonai when
Mhm.
it's actually Tammuz. But Adonis goes back to Tammuz. Osiris goes back to all of these different cults are interlinked, and they're traveling with the merchants wherever they go. The Phoenicians are bringing the goddess
Right.
Inanna, Ishtar, with them and setting up these various cults. And what was it in Athens when they said one of the supplicants of Ishtar, Inanna, it was Inanna, came into Athens, and he was dressed as a woman because they were androgynes,
Okay.
basically. They wanted to emulate the androgyne. And when he started talking to the women that were in the city, they took him and they threw him headfirst into a well and killed him. And then they had a blight, and like nothing would grow, and like people were dying, and they were like praying, and like Anana came to them and said, if you set up a temple, then I'll make all of the pestilence go away.
Right.
So they set up this temple to Ishtar Anana in ancient Athens, and as things go, that becomes the central hub of all the politics and all of the currency in Athens.
That's what I found when I looked into Ishtar and Anna.
Yep.
Throughout the millennia, that's the move.
Yep.
She appears to appear to people
Right.
and tell them, "Build me a temple."
Right.
And I mean, even maybe with John Dee and the Daughters of
Mm-hmm.
Fortitude, that sounds a little Ishtar like. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, time and time again, it's like this goddess figure comes to a group of people and asks for them to build her a temple. Or
Right.
if even maybe in the case of Jack Parsons,
Mm.
the goddess Babylon,
Yep.
she
Mystery Babylon.
she tells him not to build her a temple necessarily, but to build her an altar and how to
Right.
do it.
Mm.
And yeah, that's there was somewhere else I wanted to go with that, but I like how you point out the interlocking of all the cults
Yeah.
because I saw that too when I was looking in. It just looks like if you pull back and you look at it, it looks like a Nephilim religion that includes
Yeah.
all this different stuff, like the cult of the Rephites, the Rephaim cult,
The Rephaim. Yeah.
you know, the Ishtar goddess worship,
The
the
Moloch.
Moloch veneration of the
Yeah.
ancestors, or
Yeah.
Shamash, and all
Yeah.
that. It's all
Well,
interlocked.
so now when you look at Osiris specifically, right? when Set came in and he put him in the box, sent him down the river, that's the first death. That's the death to the mortal world. This is all esoteric, occult kind of philosophy. And so Isis finds him and brings him back. And then when Set sees him alive, he at that point cuts his body up into the 14 parts. So, and the 14th part being his phallus gets eaten by a fish, right? And so when you see Padessa with the 14 and the fish, this is all relating to Osiris philosophy, which when you get into Osiris, we see these because what happened was that phallus was replaced by an obelisk. And in some of the texts, they say she made it from earth. From one of the texts I found, it said they made it from solid gold. And she does this dance. It's like a crane dance where she would levitate over it and flap her wings like a crane, and basically separating heaven from earth. And you see this with like the Holy Spirit going back to the dove and the separation of the heavens and the earth in the early times. But nonetheless, she flapped her wings and fanning, and so you're getting into some of these wind spirits, and which you find cohesively everywhere. And
it's kind of like I'd just say maybe it's like a perversion of it's like there's two versions of the knowledge here, right?
Oh yeah,
you got
for sure
a Christian version, and then you got, for lack of a better word, a pagan version.
Well, you have the indigenous belief system, the way that they saw it in regard to, because Osiris, he is initially he is the god of life. He's resurrected as Horus, so he becomes the way for everyone to beat death and be resurrected into a higher form, right? So this is where we get these early resurrection cults coming out of Egypt and Syria and Phrygia, and even into, like we said, with Dionysus and Zeus, becoming Bacchus essentially.
Yeah.
And but when Set proceeds to kill him the second time, he cuts his body up into those 14 parts. And some of the texts say that Isis, when she went out to gather the parts, she buried them where she found them. Some say that she gathered them all and buried fake parts so that Set wouldn't be able to find the true remains of Osiris. But nonetheless, she pulls them together and wraps them in bandages. This is where we get the first mummy. This is where we also, get, it's very Promethean in the idea that she's taking these body parts and hemming them together and creating this mummy and then reanimating it so that she can pull. And it says she pulls the seed up because Osiris, when he dies, he's in the underworld and he's actually plotting ways to come back into this reality to overthrow Set, and but they say that she pulled the seed from the underworld and that's what impregnated her. And that became the birth of the Pator, or the Father Stones, which are these tall standing stones, like the obelisk.
Well, I was going to ask, is the obelisk in DC Osiris?
For sure.
And is the dome, the Capitol dome, is
Isis's belly?
The pregnant belly of Isis.
Yeah, and inside of the Capitol dome, we have the apotheosis of George Washington. And that's George Washington literally being birthed as a god in the belly of Osiris. And on the spring equinox,
becoming godlike, like Nimrod.
Becoming, yes.
Maybe.
And we mythicize, we've totally turned George Washington into a mythos in regard to bullets couldn't hit him.
Yeah.
He has all these etheric qualities. He has, the cherry tree tail, which they say never happened, but all these things about how he's so honest and, like a pure spirit and unconquerable. So they've established all this, but when you go back into the earliest ecstatic Hebrew texts, Maimonides, he talks about the idea that Adam was just a mere man that was born of another man and woman, that they just esteemed him highly. When you get into Osiris, they talk about that he was just a man, and that's why they called him Harpocrates, with the finger over his lips, to keep the secret And they said that anyone that ever discussed that he was once a man, being Kush, that they should die the death, because this is the secret form nobody should talk about, right? And so you get into these various and there was, even with Jupiter, they said that there was a temple built while he was still in human form and walked with man and women on the face of the earth. So all of these gods have been argued as to their godhood, but at the same time, what is real when our imaginations create what reality is within our own mind? And if we believe these, it's like the philosophical element. Like, you have to take all of these things as possibilities, but at the same time as not true.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. That's
You
where
know?
this gets really deep. But
Right.
I'd love to hear you break down just all
Oh,
kinds of stuff in Washington D.C. We
yeah.
just touched
Oh,
on it,
dude.
but like that.
I,
I mean, for somebody like you who's been in this stuff for 30 years studying,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I imagine, like, if you were to take a stroll through D.C., you would just be like, "Oh, I know
So,
what that is. I know what that is. I know what that is."
yes. So now I've been bumming around the country since I was like 13, 14 years old. And I've stayed a week, 10 days solid, sleeping in my car in DC and just exploring the place. At
Mhm.
least 5 or 6 times I've done
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And now, interestingly,
Did you know a lot of this then? Did you
I
know
was
what
learning
this
it
was?
as I
Yeah,
was exploring, and
yeah.
I've
Wow.
successively learned more and more. As it's just the natural course of the
Sure.
evolution of
Did you
learning.
see? Did you ever go into what is it? The terminal, the DC. What do they call that? It's like a DC terminal.
The train station.
I guess, is that what it is? I was
Yeah, I've
looking
been
at
in there.
pictures of it online, but they have
Yeah.
there's some figures up on the wall. They're
Hmm.
statues, and
Hmm.
they hold a. This is why I was looking at it, because they have shields that have the phoenix on them.
Oh yeah.
They
Yeah.
look kind of Roman. I think they're
Yeah.
supposed to be paladins, but who knows
Yeah.
what they really are.
Yeah. Right. Right.
That's just one that came to mind. But the Library of Congress
Oh yeah.
is they've got a zodiac on the
Up
floor,
there. Yeah.
zodiac circle, and then I mean the
That
place is
whole city
loaded.
is just riddled
It's
riddled with
real.
stuff. But if you go back to the earliest stuff, as far as the building of the obelisk and how it's built in two portions, the obelisk itself is 55 feet by 55 feet, right, which is 666 inches by 666 inches. And then it's 550 feet tall, which is you break that down and it's like 6,000 something inches, 6,660, inches. There's supposed to be, and I've asked them, when you go in, the steps that go up to the top, there's supposed to be 666 steps, and I wanted to count them, but they wouldn't let me walk them. But if you take the elevator, you can ask them to turn the light on in the elevator as you're going up,
Hmm.
and you can see these stones that were sent from the Great Wall of China, that were sent from, there's the Mormons sent a stone that has a beehive with honeybees on it. There's just all these, there's a stone. The Vatican actually sent a stone to put in the Washington Monument, and they took it out by the river, and they broke it up with hammers and dumped it all into the Potomac there. And
Was
they
that
say that
symbolic
the
of them, like, not wanting to be under the
right
church
under the
rule?
thumb of the altar, right,
Right.
right. So but when you go up into the obelisk at the very top, there's like a viewing windows, and you can look down, and like I was saying earlier, on the spring equinox, that the shadow of the obelisk lays directly across the mall and points right at Isis's belly,
Hmm.
right around 322, right around the spring equinox. And on the very top, it was a new formula. They had just invented aluminum, right? And this was the illumined element, right? Alumininium. And so the very top of the pyramid, they made an aluminum pyramid as a capstone for the top of the Washington Monument in DC, right?
Yeah.
And
Hey,
go
I
ahead.
want people just to think about something real quick, because just think about everything that Robbie has just laid out with DC. And I'm thinking about this interview I saw where Scott Walters talking to, he's like one of the head DC historians. And he's like, so, what do you think about the notion that there's esoteric and secret society involvement and influence in the layout of DC and the
Washington
monuments?
D.C.
And
It's undeniable.
the guy goes, no, it's not
So
present.
now
The
get
guy
this.
denied it.
Oh yeah. Then he doesn't know his history.
Right.
Because George Washington specifically brought this architect from France that was highly esoteric occult individual, Lamont something. I could look it up, but he is the one that initially set up and laid out that upside down pentagram with the city, the Rhode Island, broken, that built in all of the direct, and there's a Masonic compass and square in there. There's like just so much wrapped up just in the streets. Right. And they actually wanted to put the Washington Monument in a different place, in accordance with all these alignments, because they're aligning these streets again, just like they did in, Chichen Itza, just like they did in Egypt, just like they did in ancient Phrygia. They're aligning these things with the stars, because of the movement of the stars. And this gets again, and that's why Moses specifically forbade anything in relation to the stars at all, because he said it took away from worshiping the true God for him. Right. And it gets into the ideas of idolatry, right, on a very, because you're participating with physical reality instead of the ascended higher forms, right, through the miscellaneous Sephiroth to Kether, the highest point.
What do you think about the Pentagon? What's
the Pentagon? It's the symbol of Mars. It's the symbol of war. It's 5 pentagons inside 5 pentagons. I mean, that's a sigil. When it's like you're playing with this idea of the fives. So yeah,
and it's also the inside of a pentagram.
Pentagram, yeah. Oh yeah.
The inside of the pentagram makes a perfect pentagon.
Perfect pentagon.
Yeah.
And what was it? Agrippa. He talks about the pentagram, and he says that the most mysterious part of the pentagram is the pentagon that lies inside the pentagram, that is basically the outline of an upside down pentagram.
Yeah.
And what was it? The Greeks, they called it the pentalpha. So it's if you take 5 A's and stack them, it's basically, and the Druids, they called it the Drutenfoot, and they would wear stars on their sandals, and that was the witch's foot. So
do you see connections with the pentagram and Venus and Ishtar?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it goes right back to Ishtar and Nana, 100%. And one of those forms is Semiramis, right? The branch bearer. That if you look at the statue on the top of the Capitol dome, that is Semiramis, by her name Justice, that's up there. And that was one of her attributes, was being called Justice.
Right, so Lady Justice.
Lady Justice, yeah.
And the Romans had the goddess Justice.
Justice, yeah.
That Virgil wrote about.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then somebody showed me something at one point as well, where they found a triangle in the layout of DC. And it was I think it was the very tip of the top of the triangle was right where the Scottish Freemason.
Right, Freemason, 33rd degree Red Lodge is. Yeah.
What do you think about that? Have you seen that layout?
It's, well, one of the early propagators of the 33 degree Scottish Rite Red Lodge system, because essentially you have the Blue Lodge, which is the English Lodge, and they have the 3 degrees to become Master Mason. Then well, and then you get into the Order of Mizraim that linked into the Bavarian Illuminati through the French lodges. But when you get into the Scottish lodges, which they say are some of the oldest lodges, the Scots wear kilts, the Egyptians wore kilts. Scota, right, that became the founding of the name of Scotland itself, was from Queen Scota, that was a fleeing queen from Egypt. So at a base, Scotland, and also you see the red-headed pharaohs that are in Egypt. So you're seeing the interplay between the Scots and the Egyptians. And Scotland was the Western lands to the Egyptians. If you get into Michael Tsarian stuff, he goes deep into that. But nonetheless, so this system of the 33 degrees that was propagated in America by Albert Pike, right?
And he's buried there at that lodge, if I'm not mistaken.
Is he? Okay. I'm not sure.
Maybe they moved him, but he's got a tomb at the Scottish it's inside the building, I'm pretty sure, but I didn't mean to slow you down. But
no, I want to look that up now.
That's what I was. Did they move the body there? I don't remember. The Scottish.
So let's see. He's in a crypt inside the House Temple in the headquarters of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry in Washington, D.C. Look at that. Hey, nice. Something I was unaware of. Thanks.
Yeah. He's one of the big ones. He's one of the big boys.
Oh, yeah. Well, he wrote, Morals and Dogma.
Right.
He's also included in the letter to Mazzini, which they say is a forgery that details the First, Second, and Third World Wars.
Yeah.
Right. And if you go to Congress Square there in DC, they've had that statue of Albert Pike up, forever. And Albert Pike was also one of the creators of the Ku Klux Klan. He's one of the three creators. And if you get into the Ku Klux Klan, as far as the KKK, K is the 11th letter. It's the number of the magician, and so and it gets into Kukulkan, but the Ku Klux Klan is 11, 11, 11, which when you add it up, it's 33. So it's they're giving you the clue that it's of the and it was used as a terrorist organization, much like the ancient assassins, in the Middle East. The Hashashins, yeah. And the old man in the mountain, Albert Pike kind of is an old man in the mountain kind of figure when you get into all of this mythology,
He's got some Gandalf vibes.
Right. Well, I could go into that whole wizard, the origins of the wizard man.
The motif, the wizard motif.
Coming out of Zoroaster.
Who, again, I guess, in maybe in some ways we're back at Nimrod because...
Yeah, again. Zoroaster is directly tied in with Kush as being Nimrod. So that's the thing. There's two Nimrods. There's Nimrod the Elder, which is Kush, and then there's Nimrod the Younger, which is Nimrod. And the Elder they call the lesser, and the Younger they call the greater, right? And when they were building the Tower of Babel, the Elder Nimrod, Kush, he didn't want to participate in the building of the Tower of Babel. And they say Jehovah within the Persian text, they say Jehovah gave him 4 cities in exchange for him leaving Babylon, right? And then you get into the idea that when he fled, he went, from what I can tell, he went to Italy.
Yep, and
the Elder Kush, right?
Yeah, he went to his dad essentially.
Yeah. Same one that set up Egypt. Right. He went to Italy, and they called him Latinus. They called him the Hidden One because he was fleeing, and he didn't want to be caught. So, and he shows up in Spain, and Virgil writes about this. And Juno, after she is fallen in Babylon, right, from Semiramis, they say that she got her head cut off and she's reborn as Juno. And then we find Juno riding into Spain to set up a society there, and she comes across Latinus which is Nimrod or Saturn, right? Saturn was the first one that wore the crown. Nimrod was the first one that wore the crown. But when he fled, he went and he became the founder of the Latin language.
That's what I was going to ask. Bingo.
Yeah.
Bam.
Yeah.
Bam.
Yeah.
So Kush is Nimrod the Elder.
Yep.
He flees to Italy.
Yep.
It's almost like it's an identity change.
Yeah.
Like he
But
goes
it's just
undercover
like
or something.
it's just like when Semiramis is reborn as Juno,
Yeah.
and then we see Juno moving in to, the more Western lands,
Wow. That's
Yeah.
crazy
So,
that goes
and
back.
it's just, yeah, it's just the consistent spread of these figureheads, and there's several high level bishops that think that the separation of the world, of Noah and his sons, is the exact same story of the separation of the Olympians and the Titans. And if you get into the Sibylline oracles, she also says that she analogizes the children of Noah and tells their names in the Greek pantheon.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the Sibylline prophecy.
Does that get
That's
into the Olympiads? And
the
Selene, is it
Olympius. Yeah,
the goddess
that was
Selene?
right after the wars between the Titans and the Olympians, when they had driven the elder gods into the center of the earth
Mm-hmm.
and basically encapsulated them in the black cube in the center of the earth. That's when the Olympians came into power and they celebrated the first Olympics.
Okay. It was Selene, Greek goddess of the moon here. She was a Titan.
hmm
Did she have 66 kids? 66
Yeah,
daughters?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Connection.
Well, I mean, when you get into going back to Zoroaster, he's the one that basically brought about the ideas of if there was a beginning, there has to be an end, which brought about all this end times theology within multiple religions. But Zoroaster was also the one that said that every person has their own star or their own angel that watches over them. And every town has its own angel. And every city has its own angel. And every nation state has its own angel, all the way up to the Lord of the air, who basically oversees the earth, which is an incarnation of Samael.
Mm-hmm.
When God basically stepped back and said, after the fall of the Tower of Babel.
Wow. Yeah. I love the connections with the country though, like
Well,
all the
the
history with the flag and
yeah,
not even just the flag, the DC especially.
oh yeah.
Some of the other
But
cities.
now, when you get into the original revolutionary flag that Benjamin Franklin put together with the serpent cut into 13 parts, and then you have the 13 original colonies, getting into this idea of the 13, which is the number of death and rebirth. It goes back into these esoteric mystery schools, this 13, right? But Jesus, plus the disciples was 13. John the Baptist had 12 disciples. I've also seen 13 disciples in some places. But Albert Pike was a Jonanite. The Knights Templars were Jonanites. They worshiped John the Baptist over Jesus, So, but this whole idea of this 13 and this number of death and rebirth, tying in with, the Messiah and resurrection and kind of the country that, when you get into Manly P. Hall and you get into even Francis Bacon, going back into his writings, they were setting up the New Atlantis.
Yeah.
Right. So the United States is a type of phoenix in itself, being the rebirth of the ancient Atlantean ideas.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to me. All these guys seem to be initiates, and it seems like they passed the baton throughout time to each other. And then
hmm
you've got Francis Bacon writing the New Atlantis, and then it's, roughly 150 years later, you see George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin
Yep.
all reading that book
Oh yeah.
and setting this up. And there's a whole lot of other ties in, as you well know, like
Mm,
the whole concept, the secret destiny of America, just that whole
right.
concept is
Oh
so
yeah. Yeah.
deep.
For
It's so
sure.
deep. And even like Nostradamus, that
Yep.
Hall points out that Nostradamus may have been clued into this as well, because the
Mm,
whole thing was that there was to be, it's like going way back to the
hmm
Greeks. They knew about this mysterious continent over here in the Western Hemisphere that was meant to become the philosophical occult empire.
Right.
And that they just, throughout the ages, some of these initiates have just been alluding to that, like it's
Mm,
going to happen, it's going to happen, like in Nostradamus himself, talking about the land of the Thursdays or
mm,
Hesperides. And or no, he talked about the land that keeps the Thursdays, and this was before we had established Thanksgiving as a holiday.
mm,
It's like, whoa, how did he know that?
right.
Because Thanksgiving is every
It's always
Thursday.
on a
It's
Thursday.
always on
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
Thursday. So
Right.
it's
Right.
like every Thursday of that year. Yeah, that I love that rabbit hole. That rabbit hole goes really deep. I gotta ask you, just since we touched on DC and some of those tie-ins, did you find any with Estrella, Virgo?
Oh, Australia. Yeah. It's interesting because Queen Elizabeth specifically set herself up as Estrella,
Mm,
and personified herself as this type of virgin goddess resurrected in physical form, and used that to basically as a propaganda tool. And that's why Edward what was it? Edward Spencer wrote The Fairy Queen. That's what that book is all about, is Queen Elizabeth as Estrella, you know.
wow. How
Um,
about that?
yeah,
And then,
yeah.
and she's, speaking of Francis Bacon, right?
Yep. Oh yeah.
Some would suggest that that was her son in
Yep.
hiding. He
Right.
was certainly around. He was associated with John Dee. John Dee's in
Yep.
Elizabeth's court.
Fort.
She she knighted a guy named Thomas Gates, who became the
hmm
first governor of Jamestown
Yep. Yep.
over here. So there's a getting
Direct
back into
tie, getting
direct
into
tie.
the New
New
Atlantis
Atlantis. Yep,
and
going to
setting
New
up
Atlantis.
this,
Hmm.
this land of the philosophers,
Right.
the philosopher kings, going back to the Platonic ideas of, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad we touched on that, because it's cool to get your thoughts on just that overall scenario, the overall
Well, so one
notion.
more thing before we
Mhm.
get past the Washington D.C. thing and the obelisk, right? I
Yep.
don't know if you know, but there's actually a secret occulted black obelisk that is next to the Washington Monument.
No.
And yeah, so if you go in, you can get the park guards. You have to ask a park guard to do it, right?
Okay.
But there's a manhole cover, and they'll pull the manhole cover off, and there's a secret culted obelisk that's black, and it's 1/32 the size of the Washington Monument, right? And it's linked to it underground, because to distribute the piezoelectricity that the Washington Monument makes, because it's the largest freestanding structure with no mortar. So those blocks of granite are just pushing against each other gravity wise, which is
Mm.
generating piezoelectricity. So, in order to distribute that, they built this secret black obelisk under the ground. Otherwise, lightning would be striking the Washington Monument all the
Sure.
time. Yeah.
Why does it have to be secret though?
Well, it's just secret in the sense that most people don't know about it.
Right. Okay.
I'm
Makes sense.
telling you,
Fair enough.
you can go look at it if you want to.
Fair
You
enough.
just yeah. What is it? With like the Masonic orders, they're like, if you want to be one, just ask. So
Yeah.
any of this knowledge, you just have to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point, man. Well, I mean, is it underground for a reason? I got the feeling that
Because
it's
it's
underground.
yeah, it is underground. It's
Yeah.
underneath a manhole cover.
Yeah. Does it have to be
So
underground?
Well, it's linked in with the
Okay.
soil and and then they use that to basically as almost a transistor to regulate the energetic force of the monument.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
funny. I was reading about Serpent Mound,
Oh yeah, I've been
and
there.
apparently at one point in the egg, if we're going to call it an egg,
Yeah, yeah.
it looks like, so for people listening, it looks like a giant snake effigy, and it looks like it has an egg in its mouth. Well, at
Right.
one point, apparently in the egg in the center was an obelisk,
Mm-hmm.
and it just kept getting struck by lightning.
Yeah.
And this is the reason what they give for why they removed it.
Huh.
I mean, I would imagine that it was maybe meant to get struck by lightning.
Yeah. Right. Right. Well, that's when you get into Zoroaster, when you get into Enoch, when you even looking at some of the Roman, Caesars, it was a highly respected function to call down lightning from the heavens, and if you go back to ancient Cana, this lightning, they called it Gibble, and it was a friendly god to humans that would bring the refreshing rain for the crops, and it would light up the night sky. It was illuminating. And then if we follow this Gibble, right,
Mhm.
we see in the city where Osiris floats down, and is encased in that tamarisk tree that we were talking about. That is the city of Byblos, right? Which that's what the Greeks called it, but the Syrians called it Gibel, right? So going back to this ancient lightning god Gibel, right?
Mm.
And the men that lived there under the king of Tyre, that is Hiram Abiff, they were the Giblemites. So these are the stonemasons that they send to build Solomon's temple, that are these Gibbels or these Giblemites, that are these ancient worshipers of lightning,
Mm.
coming from the ancient Canaanites and the Babylonians. And but nonetheless, they go in and they say that at the fall of the Tower of Babel, that masonry was disassembled, and it didn't come back together again until the building at the Tower of Babel, when you had, or the building of Solomon's temple, when you have the Hebrew masons coming together with the Phoenician masons, which are those Hamite Cushites that had come down and become Phoenicians, right?
Mhm.
They come in and they help the Israelites build the temple. So
Mhm.
again, you have these ancient Cushites, the line of the ancient Cushites, that are related to these, fallen ones that are coming in and helping build the Temple of Solomon.
Yeah. Yeah, masonry goes way back, it seems. And
Mm,
I've heard many different explanations and moments in time where that could have sprung up.
yeah,
And the temple seems to be one that comes up a lot. I've heard
right.
several people say that masonry goes back to Solomon's temple. And
Yeah.
I've heard it said that it goes back to the second temple, which was built,
Mm.
commissioned under
Zerubbabel.
Herod.
Yeah, King Herod came in. Well, Zerubbabel initially built it, and then King Herod came in and reconditioned it and made it
Yeah,
even larger, more grand.
right.
But now back to Nimrod, right? If you look into the earliest Masonic constitutions, the York, there's at least 3 or 4 of them that A.G. Mackey talks about in his Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. That the initial Masonic constitutions all specifically say that Nimrod was the first Mason, and that he kept upwards of 40 to 60,000 Masons to build the Tower of Babel, and that he loved them and treated them well. And when you go back into some of those Middle Eastern cultures, we have this character called Nimamud, who was the first one that made bricks. He was also called Diamechius, and he was the one that had all the knowledge and built great things, all tying back in with this idea of Kush, building up Egypt, building up, these, and also Kush is directly related, or Nimrod the Elder is directly related with the creation of writing, you know.
Latin
So, well, and when
and
he
in addition
flees,
to, right?
yes, and he basically creates the written language while he's in Egypt,
Mm.
and then because there's at one point, who was it? I think it's Thoth, and he's talking to one of the higher gods, and he's like, I've created this great thing. Maybe it was Kush, and he's talking to Thoth. I forget how the story goes. I would have to look at it, but he's telling him how he created this great thing that will make it so people can remember things more easily. And he talks about how he invented writing, right?
I see.
And I think it's Thoth comes back at him, and he's like, "You didn't invent anything great. All you did was invent something that is going to cause people not to use their memories, not to remember things, because they have all these things available that they can look up, and so it's going to take away from the human ability to be able to have recall and memory palaces like, Bruno Diagiorno, and just getting into these ideas of the mental landscape. I mean, when you go back into the Torah, all of that was initially an oral tradition, and it was sung, as a song, and it had a certain demeter, certain cadence, that if they were to ever take a word out, it would change a word, it would change the melody of the song. So it had this written in way for them to tell and make, just like with the sibling prophecies. When the sibling prophecy would give a prediction of what was coming, it would always be in this pentameter, this certain poetic style. And when they got the prophecy, they would read it. And if it wasn't in the correct form, then it was a false prophecy and they would throw it away.
So did it have to have a musical quality to it?
Yes, all of this stuff is directly, I
From
mean, there was a
music
lot of
or
singing
sound,
and sound, resonant
frequency?
frequency, exactly.
Yeah.
And you have Osiris, back to Osiris. He had they called it the Song of Osiris, and it was the 7 sacred vows that were used in resonant form to basically manipulate reality, right?
Right.
And that became, when Pythagoras went to Egypt and was indoctrinated into the mysteries, that's when he started talking about the singing of the planets, and he
Oh,
had a
wow.
brother. Yeah, he had a brother that was like a savant idiot, and he could hear all. And even now, with autistic people, it's a common case scenario that they can hear transistors. They can hear like shorted wires in the walls that we can't perceive. And are they hearing it, or are they perceiving energetic forms that are stimulating or disturbing them? So, but nonetheless, Pythagoras, he said that this this pentatonic musical system that he created, with and establishing the chords, was the singing of the spheres. And so when you get into those 7 sacred vows, everything in the ancient world was based around sevens, based on these 7 ancient planets. So it's, and he took that, the singing of the planets, and constructed the modern chord system that gave us the Western tuning that is essentially where we get the modern day tuning that we listen to music with.
So that's what they mean when they say music goes back to Pythagoras.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And J.R. Tolkien in
Yep.
the Semiramis.
The Cimmerian.
Cimmerillion, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I just combined, I think I just
Yeah.
used the god's name.
Ceramist and yeah.
Not Semiramis.
Yeah.
The Cimmerillion, yes.
Yeah.
He has, that's like his origin story kind of for the
Mhm.
Lord of the Rings universe, and that's what happens
Yeah.
there. He has these angelic figures singing
Right.
things into existence.
Right. And that's the ring. That's the Lord of the Ring, the vibrational tone that's resonating out. And I think that that's a great story that Tolkien tells within the Silmarillion, that there was the Lord of the Rings that produced the vibration that was echoing out. And as it echoed out, all of these entities like became in tune with it, and they started singing with it. And Tolkien, this is where he kind of describes the fall of Lucifer, essentially, was there was one of those angelic type forces that saw the song, and it was so beautiful and he loved it so much that instead of singing along with them, he began to sing his own song about how beautiful the ring was. And that's essentially the beginning of free will, or the fall from Eden.
Mm. Wow. What a great
Yeah.
breakdown.
Yeah.
What a great breakdown.
So, but yeah, man, I love this stuff. I just
Me too.
have fun.
That's why if I had a question and I forgot it because I got sucked into
Wrapped
this.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, into what we were just talking about there. But no, this has been great, man.
Yeah.
Did you want to tie a bow on it? Did you want to wrap anything up? I know we danced around Nimrod, and we actually touched on Nimrod quite a bit, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I know you've got the book coming out on to do with Nimrod. So if
Yeah.
there's anything
Yeah.
you wanted to tie up with that, you can.
It's as far as the book, I really just get into the idea that Nimrod, the younger, and the elder, were the ones that created the mystery systems. And it was at the point with the Tower of Babel, when the elder Nimrod, fled and became Latinist, that the younger Nimrod, that was the point at which he turned against God. And he started doing these blasphemous things and doing these blood rituals. And, there was the prophecy. There was a book called The Prophecy of Nimrod, where they prophesized that Abraham was going to come and overthrow him, and we have in the Bible, we have, what is it, Esau, that goes and cuts Nimrod. That's Nimrod the younger's head off. And that's when he takes the skin from Nimrod, but the book is basically about, I trace the lineage of this skin that they talk about being
Oh
Adam's
wow.
mortal remains. And it's basically like a necromantic garment that they separate out the bones. The skull of Adam ends up getting deposited in Jerusalem, and that becomes Golgotha. That becomes the place of the skull where Jesus is crucified. Whereas the skin itself, you have the book of Jasher, which talks about Nimrod getting the skin from Kush. And then if you look in the Bible, it says that it was handed down through the line of Seth. So there's two opposing viewpoints of this story. But at the same time, the Bible also says that Esau killed Nimrod and took the skin. And that skin, it becomes basically the ritual garment that's used in the blessing of the 12 tribes of Israel. So, and I kind of follow that whole story and give you all the sources, and kind of hash it out.
Yeah. So, and just a side note here, you made mention of this earlier in the show as well, and I just want to get your thoughts on this real quick. With Jasher and
Hmm.
Jubilee and some of those, and Enoch, I think
Right.
we talked earlier about them getting, I don't know, for lack of a better term, taken out of the Bible under King James. Do you know what happened with all that?
Well, Jasher was actually a book that was written by the exiled Jews that got taken into captivity. So this was written in Babylon. There was a specific character that wrote it.
So it's more of a Babylonian text.
It's a Babylonian text, yeah, yeah.
Gotcha.
But when you get into Jubilees and you get into Enoch and you get into some of these, books that talk about money and truth and kind of things that, but even at the same time, with the King James Bible, it was in Latin. It was still occulted. It was still, the Latin service. People didn't it wasn't until Luther really, translated it and used Gutenberg's printing press to start to distribute it, that you create the Protestant or the Protestant, those that are protesting the Protestant movement that has the interpersonal relationship with God versus having to go through the intermediary of the priest, which Jesus talks about in the tabernacle with the ripping of the curtain, that there's basically no separation between us and our relationship with higher form, so it's almost like it was occulted and used as an opiate for the masses. And then when Luther got a hold of it, now how many denominations and schisms and, between the East and the West and the Baptists and the Protestants and the Mormons and the, Martinists, thousands and thousands, it's like Rama, he talked about in the beginning, things were simple. And as humanity expands and things become more complicated, that will be the way of the world as well. So we're just living in the natural function of the fractal.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, man, this has been great. I know I could keep going with you. And
yeah,
obviously
that was fun, man.
Yeah, this was really fun. I appreciate it. And I just wanted to jump in with that question, and I'm glad we got to talk about your book some. So if there's anything else you want to lay out what in regards to that, you can.
Yeah.
Or we can just wrap it up.
Yeah, I would say that if anybody wants to check out my stuff as far as my artwork that I do, or if they want to check out my Metta Mindcast podcast, you can, or any of my social media, you can go to my Linktree, which is Linktree RMARX, and that'll pull up every way that you can connect with what I've been doing.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on. This was a blast.
Yeah. For sure. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah. Wow. What a ride. I mean,
and we barely touched on this. I mean, it's just a tapestry, that's laid out before us.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll have to reconvene on these matters another time. This was fun, man. So thanks again for coming on. I'll have your links and everything for everyone. Just go down below and you can get his links and find your way to his stuff. And as always, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.